Welcome to the official podcast of DogsDaily.com, a Sports Illustrated channel.
Gets to the edge. Sonny Michel will send the Dogs home to the championship game.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you're in the right place.
Anthony Edwards hit the jam. Are you kidding me?
Hosted by Dogs Daily writers Jeremiah Stoddard, Kyle Funderburk, and Jonathan Williams.
Here's a pitch. Hit high out into right center with some carry. It's got a chance. This ball is out of here. Tucker Bradley has won it.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Classic City Sports. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard along with Jonathan Williams. Have a lot to go over for tonight's show. Kirby Smart had a nice little press conference yesterday that we got to kind of review, see what we thought about it. Jonathan actually put out an article on there today on DogsDaily.com as well. So if you didn't get a chance to read that, go back and read the exact comments that he was able to put on there. But we're going to expound on some of the things that we saw in there as well and kind of dig into what we think about those comments that were made and different things that he could be, talking about and different things to look for there. So several things from Dominic Blaylock to Jalen Carter, the defensive back room, coaching staff, Stetson Bennett's areas of improvement, all of that kind of stuff we're going to kind of dive into from those different sections that you might find in that article that Jonathan put out today. Figured it was a good thing to talk about after a week of spring practice being in. I feel like we got a little bit more information than we usually do out of Kirby Smart, and some of the things that he said in that press conference kind of surprised both of us when we were talking about it. So we're excited to dive into all of that. And then, as always, we're going to wrap the show up with some King of the Hill. Talking season is something we didn't do this week, actually.
I hadn't done it in a while. Might have to bring it back in a little bit.
People aren't sending us stuff, so if you're listening, you need to start
sending
us
us y'all,
stuff. Yeah.
All right? Don't blame us. It's on you guys, okay?
We need help from the audience on Talking Season. So for future reference, if you're, scrolling through Twitter and you see this random Tennessee fan, which actually came across something on there recently with one of them, and where they're saying some outlandish things that just doesn't make sense, just kind of makes you laugh at them, send them to us on Twitter. I'll drop the link here in a second, or not the link, but the, there we go.
Good old handy-dandy Twitter.
Well, that's not what it was. But why did it say that? Oh, they added something on there. Do your, support Ukraine.
Cool.
That's put on there. They just randomly put that on there.
Right.
But do that anyways. But Dogs Daily. When did they put this here?
No idea.
Anyways, that caught me off guard a little bit too. But anyways, Dogs Daily, POD on Twitter. Reach out to us and give us, anything that you find that way. And this is not a great start to the show for me, is it?
We're kind of fumbling a little bit. Fumbling, bumbling, stumbling. But we're going to
make it.
We are.
We always
push through.
But anyways, we'll go into our King of the Hill segment at the end of the show. Should you measure the greatness of a player based on championships, or how much does that play into the greatness of a player? That's going to be what we talk about. There's been some other things in the news lately and with Atlanta sports and other things like that kind of sparks conversation over things like that. So, and I've seen stuff on ESPN and everything about certain players that made me kind of, get into this topic as well. So that's going to be the King of the Hill topic that we will get into at the end of the show. But we'll go ahead and kick it off. Let's start with, Kirby Smart talked about Dominic Blaylock a little bit. And, he talked about him being a little bit rusty, which is what to be expected. He hasn't really been active in that lineup for a while now with his injuries that he's been dealing with for the past season and a half, I would say, at this point. So he's definitely going to be rusty, but he's eager. He's confident with the ball in his hand, from what Kirby Smart was saying. And that's something that it was very good to hear for me, because I'm excited to see what he's able to do in this lineup, because I think he's an X-Factor type player that we haven't had the chance to see in a while.
Yeah, it's definitely probably a name that kind of has gone a little bit forgotten just because you hadn't seen him in such a long time. I think people forget that during his freshman year, him and George Pickens were like the duo that everybody was looking to see for the next few years together, because they played so well together during their first season together. And then Dominic Blaylock gets hurt in the SEC championship game against LSU, trying to rehab back, get things going again. And then he hits another wall with injuries. So you haven't seen much of him really at all. But now it really seems like he's kind of getting back into his groove. But this isn't the first time either you've heard Kirby Smart talk about a player kind of being rusty when it came to injuries. That was a big talking point of JT Daniels when he was coming back from injury as well. When people were hooting and hollering for him to be the starting quarterback, Kirby Smart was like, he's been rusty in practice. Like, he has not looked the same, and that's expected when a guy misses 3 or 4 weeks. Excuse me. But so it is great to see him and hear Kirby Smart say that he is doing better in practice. He's working slowly back. And I think the most interesting point of this whole conversation about Dominic Blaylock was he's a veteran because he has experience. And at this point, anybody with experience, in-game experience, is a veteran. Whether you're a first year or not, if you have experience in the game, you're a veteran because, as he said, they're very thin at wide receiver. It's how he put it. He said we don't have much experience, if any at all, really, at the position. So it's a big deal for Dominic Blaylock to be out there right now, getting his body ready for the season, because he was a huge weapon for Georgia when he was healthy. And so it's going to be great to have him back as an asset. And he's just an all-around playmaker. And as Kirby Smart said, he's just got a really good nose for the football, and he does really good things when he gets the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I mean, he was extremely exciting to watch in his first season in Athens. You know, like you said, before he got hurt against LSU in the SEC championship game, he had plenty of signs of like greatness that season. Like he was making flash plays and stuff like that all over the place. So I'm excited to see, you know, now that he's going to be fully recovered and, you know, knocks off some of that rust between spring practice and the G-Day game. By the time fall comes around, that's a player that I think is going to be able to – I think he's going to surprise people again because, like you said, I really feel like Dog Nation somewhat forgot about him. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the fan base may have forgotten about him because he's been so out of the lineup for so long, and you've seen guys like A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey and stuff really step up into that kind of limelight in the meantime while he's been out. And so they're kind of expecting more names that they're used to over the past season where Georgia went to win a national championship. So I think that's going to be something that it's going to almost be like a new name on the block, but in reality, he's been here for a couple seasons and he's just been dealing with injury. But he was a great wide receiver his freshman year. So that's something that I think is going to stand out massively on there as well. But like you talked about, that wide receiver room is very thin, you know, as far as depth goes. Like that was one thing that we talked about, and that'll go into the next piece about, you know, defensive backs and stuff as well. Because he talked about how thin Georgia was at both defensive back and at wide receiver. He said it's the thinnest that it has been in the 7 years that he has been there as far as depth goes. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have talent at those positions. Everyone knows that Keely Ringo is a star at corner right now. And, you know, and there's some other names that are coming up at that position group as well. But on wide receiver, it's A.D. Mitchell, you have Ladd McConkey, and then you're going to have these guys step up into that position, you know, that hasn't made a name for themselves yet and stuff like that. You don't have 4 or 5, you know, guys just ready to go that you're used to seeing. It's not a veteran, you know, group. It's not. You're going to have a lot of younger guys in there, or people that maybe you can call them veterans, right? Mm-hmm. But they haven't really played that much because of injury or things like that. You got like Rosemary Jack Saint, You've got Blaylock, and you know you do have Kearis Jackson, so that is a veteran presence, right?
Absolutely.
But other than, you know, then you've got, you know, true freshmen or redshirt freshmen or sophomores, that kind of thing. So they are very thin at that position group. Then on the other side, like I was saying, at defensive back is also extremely thin, right? There's Absolutely. A huge conversation about who's going to be the second guy. And we had that conversation last year, and it ended up being Keely Ringo as the next guy up on that position group. This year, it's Keely Ringo and Darian Kendrick's gone. So who's the next guy? It's going to be a name that you haven't seen yet, because that's who Georgia has on the roster, which speaks volumes to what Kirby is saying about not having that depth at that position group this year.
Yeah, and I think really the most interesting point of that when he was discussing like how thin they are at wide receiver and defensive back is right after saying it's the thinnest they've ever been in 7 years at Georgia. He goes on and says, and you can point a finger and blame anywhere you want, but it's the life of college football coach now. You don't have depth. You don't have it anywhere. It's easy to leave and go places. Those guys are a little more higher maintenance in terms of thinking of themselves, and they expect to play right away, and they're quicker to go. So it's certainly a position of concern for us in terms of recruiting and development at the skill position.
And that's what I was talking about at the beginning of the show when I said we saw something from Kirby that I'm not used to seeing. When does he make comments like that?
Yeah, it's because typically, like a typical Kirby response to that is, you know, we just got to go out there and get better. We got to get younger guys to step up, and it's going to be about who wants them. We're just asking our guys to work hard and show us who gets to earn that spot. But for a little bit, he starts saying, like, you can blame any of us if you want, but really it's just how college football is now. And because people want to go jump in the portal and they want to leave, we have to deal with things like that. We have to deal with having a cornerback battle with guys that don't have really any in-game experience aside from a Nyland Green who hopped in some like garbage. I hate to say garbage time, but it was at the end of a game and blowouts like that, or Kamari Lassiter who did the same thing as well. That's kind of what you have to deal with when guys are wanting to hit the portal and you don't have guys that really stick around for 3 or 4 years. And it's something that Kirby's been very vocal about over the past couple of months is the direction of college football and how things are changing. And so it is a surprise to see him talk like that and make those type of comments in a press conference because he's very close to the vest usually when he's in his press conferences. I don't know exactly the way to put it, but he's just very like business.
He usually gives you more coach
short
speak.
And sweet.
Coach speak.
Yeah.
That, you just got to get in there every day and work hard and, build on yourself and get
Who
better.
Who wants it more?
Like those comments, right? But this time he actually stepped out and said, it's kind of basically said it's hard to have depth at positions like that because guys in those positions oftentimes look for other places.
And he even goes on to say those guys are higher maintenance too.
Which is, it kind of caught me off guard to hear that.
Yeah.
Like it really kind of did. When I read that, it really, I was like, that's not a comment. I read it like 3 times in a row and I was like, he said higher maintenance. Like not a normal thing you hear from Kirby Smart.
No, not at all. Basically saying like, we got to make sure we keep these guys comfortable. And we got to check in on them and make sure everything's going. And they're going to come to us because they're not happy a lot of the times or they're not getting a lot of playing time. So for him to say those type of players are high maintenance also, like it gets into that area of things as well. Yeah, it's definitely not typical of Kirby Smart to make those type of comments in a press conference at all. But nonetheless, it makes for an interesting talking point as well because he's telling you, like, we are really trying to figure things out at both wide receiver. And for him to say this is the thinnest we've ever been at wide receiver and defensive back in the 7 years he's been at UGA is a lot to say too, because if you go back to like that 2019 SEC championship game after the LSU loss, he talked about how recruiting at wide receiver was a major issue. And that was on him for not recruiting enough guys and getting those type of guys in. And so that would probably that would make you think that was probably the thinnest they've ever been at wide receiver. But now he's telling you that it's this year. You're coming off a national championship. And now he's saying that it's the thinnest that they've ever been. So yeah, very interesting comments from Kirby during that portion of his press conference. And it just keeps going though, guys. We still got plenty more to talk about. When I tell you he dropped a lot of info yesterday, he dropped a ton of it. And so, yeah, we can transition into the next one though. The next one that he talked about, Stetson. This is also another interesting one as well. So it's hard to go a press conference now without Stetson Bennett's name being brought up at all. We saw it all last season, and you're going to see a lot more of it this year. He was actually included in a Jeopardy question. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
So
yeah.
Stetson got some recognition on this Jeopardy show. So he's finally made it. If that was his pinnacle, he has finally made it. But so there were like 2 types of questions that were asked about Stetson. One of them was kind of centered around why he wanted to come back, like what was the reasoning for it. But the first one that was touched upon is, what can Stetson improve on this upcoming season? And Kirby he got right into the question within the first sentence, and he said timing. And it's got to be about decision-making as well. People were really critical of Stetson and his decision-making. And he does kind of or at least last year, there were some moments where he made some boneheaded mistakes. He didn't exactly make the right read. And there were some throws where they were just kind of head-scratchers. And Kirby described them as boneheaded throws.
That also caught me off guard.
And boneheaded mistakes as well. So
Kirby took the gloves off.
He did.
He wasn't trying to save feelings in that locker room this time around. And it was interesting to see.
Yeah. For sure. So those were the 2 things that he really touched on of what Stetson can improve upon. But he also went on to say, like, we were very supportive of Stetson last year. If you couldn't, as he said, if you couldn't tell, like they were very supportive of him. I don't think anybody couldn't tell by that because they stuck by their guy every single week, regardless of the amount of questions that they faced in their press conferences. No matter how many times they were asked why is Stetson Bennett the starter, he gave you an answer and he stood by his guy. And he went on to say he made some great plays with his legs and his movement in the pocket as well, which we've talked about plenty of times on the show as well. So he talked about the things that he does well, but he also said that, Stetson's still got a lot of stuff to improve upon, even though he's been here he's been in college football for 4 years. And I took it as, don't just assume that Stetson's here to be our starting quarterback automatically. Don't just think that we're giving him the starting quarterback position, because just like anybody else in that quarterback room, he's got stuff to improve on, just like Beck and Brock
flaws,
Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton have stuff to improve upon as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I took away from it was, he's acknowledging the fact that there are areas for him to improve, and he does need to improve. And I think that's the key part, that he needs to improve on it, because there are guys knocking on that door, going back to it. And it was like what we talked about earlier. You and I were talking, and he came out, and Stetson came out and said, like, he reached out and talked to Kirby Smart before making that decision. He heard some things that he did like. He heard some things he didn't like. Yep. And it made me think that, like, personally, I sat here and you sat here. We talked about it before. Was I felt like he almost needed to be promised that he would start to come back, because you can't go through what he did and then come back to Georgia to try to. Because the reason he basically determined he needed to play another season of college football.
Yes.
So which he does, because he wasn't going to get drafted. He would probably, like, especially at his size, he might not get picked up off free agency, stuff like that. He needs to be able to make a name for himself by playing again.
Well, if you remember too, Stetson made comments of, "I'm going to play college football next year. I just don't know where." So there was some time where even Stetson was kind of saying, like, "Look, I'm going to be in college football. I'm going to play quarterback somewhere, but I don't know if it's going to be at UGA." So I think that also, like, really ties into what he's saying here of, like, Kirby Smart told me a lot of things, and I had some mixed feelings about a lot of it.
He did. But my point of saying that too is he needed to go somewhere he's going to start. If Georgia couldn't come back and give him the confidence, at least somewhat, like, at this point, I take it as Kirby Smart did not tell him he would be the starter, guaranteed, right? Like, I don't think that he would have been willing to say that. That's not how Kirby Smart operates at any position at all. So I don't think he would have necessarily said that to the most important position on the offense as well, especially with as much talent that he has sitting in the wings waiting to get their chance to play, right? So you had this guy, like, talking to the coaching staff, trying to figure out if he was going to be able to. He had to have enough said to make him feel like he was confident to come in and play at Georgia right away, because he couldn't risk coming in and being benched and not playing his last eligible year of college football at this point. Like, he can't do that. That's why it was, I'm playing in college somewhere next year. I just don't know where. It had to be somewhere he was going to start. So I do think that he was given the confidence that he would be the starter at the beginning of it, right? That's where I'm going to stop. Like, I'm going to start in of, I don't think he was promised, like, that he would be the starter guaranteed. I think he was possibly told that, he's going to be the starter going into camp. He'll give him that. And after that, you're going to have to make sure you keep it.
Well, and honestly,
I think that's fair.
I honestly think that Stetson is the kind of guy that he wouldn't necessarily want you to just outright tell him, like, you're going to be our starter. I think part of what has made Stetson so great during his time at UGA is that there's always been something about him that says the odds are against him, and that there's always this next hill to get over.
That's a good point.
There's always something to achieve. And I think that's what makes him a good quarterback, is that he's always chasing something. He's always going to have something that he's going after. And that's part of the reason why he's a winner. That's why his record at UGA is as good as it is. And so I think it almost helps Stetson, and it makes Stetson better for them to come in and say, like, we got 3 really talented guys on our roster right now, so we're not just going to go ahead and tell you. You got to earn it. You got to prove it to us again for the 3rd time. And you got to prove to us that you are supposed to be the starting quarterback for us this season. We're not going to tell you it. And I think Stetson kind of took that as, okay, I love UGA and I want to compete, so why not come back here and I'll earn that spot again.
Yeah, it is where he wants to be.
That's the type of player that, at least from my perspective, just watching him and watching his career develop, that's the type of player that I feel like Stetson Bennett is.
And I think that's where you're going to get the best out of him. I do think that he's a player that does kind of thrive. Like, he likes the pressure of, he feels like he's kind of been,
that last drive against Alabama. Like, you could tell, like, that is a moment that he lives for. He lives for that moment.
Well, and also that moment too was, one of my favorite things that I've heard him say, and it played out afterwards, was after he had fumbled and, Bama got the ball, put them in scoring position, all that good stuff there. He came out, he said he was talking on the sideline to himself, and, he goes, I'm not going to be the reason we lose this game.
Yep.
He made sure that he was not going to be the reason that Georgia lost that game after that moment. So that's why he came out and had absolutely lit it up. It's a mindset thing for him, and I think he needs to feel a little bit of that pressure in order to do it. And I think a lot of quarterbacks, I think that's why Kirby Smart doesn't really get into, like, the guaranteeing starting jobs at any position, because the only way you're going to get the most out of somebody is if they feel like they've got to keep competing and bettering themselves, which I think is the point of, like, what we've been talking about, or what Kirby talked about in his press conference, was everyone needs to be bettering themselves every single day and improving on things, no matter how good you are, which we'll get into somebody else here in a minute.
Just about to say that.
That will really kind of make you say the same thing. Is it doesn't matter who you are, you have area that you need to be improving on, and every single day you need to be working on that, or else you're going to lose your job.
It's like a bend don't break mentality. Like, who's going to bend under pressure and who's going to break? Those are important things to figure out for a football team, especially when you're playing at the level that UGA is. You got to find your guys that it doesn't matter what the odds are against them or what the moment looks like in a football game. Who's going to be able to bend with the moment and figure things out, and who's someone that you can count on? And Stetson has so far proven to be that type of person. But also, you can't buy into the hype of yourself. You can't just kind of coast through things when it seems like you've hit the top of your hill for your career. And that's kind of what Kirby Smart said when talking about Jalen Carter in this discussion, because there's been while most of the buzz has been around the guys that are going into the NFL and the guys that are about to be drafted, probably 4 in the first round, possibly. There's also been a lot of talk about Jalen Carter, and people have been saying, yeah, Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt and Travon Walker are really, really talented. And there's a reason why they're all looking to be first-round locks. But the best one at UGA hasn't even come out of college yet, and he's still there. And they're talking about Jalen Carter. And so I think that kind of is a reason why Kirby Smart went on to make the comments that he did, because he was asked about Jalen Carter and kind of the role that he's taken on now, because it's basically him now. He finally is in the spotlight for once in his career, because it's, like we said, it's always been Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Travon Walker, those type of guys. Now it's all Jalen Carter, and everybody's eyes are going to be on him for the anytime Georgia's on defense.
Yeah.
And so he went on to make comments of, like, he first thing he did was, or not the first thing, but one of the comments he made was talking about Devontae Wyatt's career and his trajectory at Georgia. He was like, Devontae Wyatt lost weight. He got quicker. He put in work in the weight room. He put in work on the field constantly. And he said that Devontae Wyatt was in his first year, second year, and third year was not the same player that he was in his fourth and fifth year.
Yeah.
And so he said, we would like to get more out of Jalen Carter. As good as he is, as talented as he is, and as much of a force he is on defense, we want to get more out of him. We want him to be a leader. We want him to step into these new roles, and we just want him to better himself. And so,
yeah. Well, and he used the comparison about Wyatt on there, and he said that Wyatt made himself a good player, like a great player, right? Like
he played himself
into being a good player, is what he said. And what he meant by that was, he said, one, his work ethic was not going to be beat. Nobody was working harder than him in that, year 4 and 5.
Yep.
People weren't working harder than him. That just wasn't going to happen. He lost weight. He got stronger. He made himself the player that he needed to be. And if he had gone to the NFL last year, he wouldn't have been a first-round draft pick. Now he's a first-round draft pick. You know what I mean? So, that's what he's saying, is no matter how good you are, you can get better. And he's wanting Jalen Carter. I think it was a message to him of like, hey, man, don't listen to all of the hype right now, because that'll be the death of you if you sit there and you just absorb too much of that, rather than, hey, you've got stuff to improve. You can get better, so you need to get better. And so every day you've got to be grinding and trying to be a better player than you are, or than you were yesterday. And so I think that's what the message was. And nobody's safe on that lineup from hearing that. If that's probably your best defensive player is being called out in a media session by Kirby Smart, saying that we need more from him. We need him to be better than he is. That's just because he's continuing to push people no matter who it is.
Kirby Smart's really good at recognizing talent. Obviously, that's
For sure.
why he recruits really well. But also in instances like this, where you have a really, really good athlete already on your football team, like Jalen Carter already is a freak athlete.
Yeah.
But Kirby Smart also knows that there's a portion of Jalen Carter's game that he can improve upon, and he can become even more talented and even more better. That doesn't make much sense.
More better.
Yeah, more better, whatever. But
Start journalism major
and
in the room.
Yeah, I know that. Getting that J school degree, but not putting much use to it already, I guess. But and he can really become even more desirable if he puts in the work, if you do the things that are necessary of yourself at practice, if you continue to work hard and really focus on getting better each and every day at practice. You've seen it multiple times with different types of player. Obviously, like we said, Devontae Wyatt being one of them. And I think it's why you see a good number of Georgia players every year come back. And because Kirby knows there's still something about his players. They're like, look, you stay around for one more year. If you put in the time, we will get you even more. We can up that draft stock. We can get you some more money, but you really got to buy in and you got to understand what we are preaching to you. And I think that's kind of what he's telling Jalen Carter right now is, yeah, you're really freaking good, kid, but you can be even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on something too that's going to help him moving forward too, is now he has even more proof of what he did with other players there, right? So he can go, hey, I encouraged this player to come back, maybe, right? Like, so let's say Wyatt or Jordan Davis came back, and other players decided to come back, Trayvon Walker, and other players are continuing to come back like that, and then now they're first round draft picks or high draft picks, early rounds. He now can go back to players. Jalen Carter's going to be gone after 3 years, regardless, but he can go to other players that might be borderline and say, hey, I need you to trust this. And I think you could come back and you could improve that, make more money in the NFL and have that higher draft pick, all that good stuff. But if you come back, I need you to be working extremely hard. I need you to be trying to be a better player every single day to get to that point. And I promise you I can make that happen for you if you buy in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, though, is that you can't get better unless you pay attention to your coaches and you listen to them. And that was another thing that Kirby Smart got into during his press conference, was that he talked about the new coaches. Stacey Searles. Sorry, you got to kind of add in some Southern dialect when you say that name. Jeremiah can help us out with that one. He's from Oglethorpe County, like we touched on before. But
listen here, more better. I don't want to. Don't come at me about having an accent.
Grammar
when you say
and accent.
More.
I don't know if that really ties into one
Dean.
another,
By the way, Dean, you're late, and I'm disappointed in you. But I'm gonna go ahead and say Terry over Grady. Yes. On that note,
he didn't even go to Terry.
Doesn't matter. Business majors over journalism.
But he talked about Stacey Searles and Fran Brown, the new defensive back coach and the new offensive line coach. And he really said a lot of good things about Fran Brown specifically. But he really but the things he touched on as a collective unit he was like, I've loved the enthusiasm from our new coaches. I love their energy at practice as well. They're really getting our players to buy in. They're building relationships really quickly, and they're like getting their feet wet right now. And they're really starting to figure things out because, during the first week when you're a new coach, you're trying to figure out like how everything goes. What's the movement like at practice? What is expected of me is what Kirby Smart said. Like, what am I expected of from Coach Smart and the rest of my staff and my players? And they're really figuring things out quickly on the fly as well. So those are great things to hear from them as well. But he specifically was asked also about Fran Brown. And man, he dropped a lot of positive things about Fran Brown. And it really told you why he was brought on to UGA staff. And one thing that he touched on was, he said, I was very pleased with how hard he works, relationships with the players. He's relentless in recruiting. The guy communicates so well and pushes so hard. I think he's going to be a really good coach. I think he's a rising star in this profession because of the energy he puts into it.
Absolutely. And the other things that, he's talking about how hard he's working in there, his relationships with the players and how important that is. And the other thing that he was talking about when he was just talking about the players is he likes the players to match the energy of the coach. And so he needs that energy from those coaches. And I think that he's getting that from Fran Brown so far. Like, so it's working out, and it's a great thing to hear because he's a newer coach in that, realm. He's not like this big name coming in that you've had in other positions and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a good thing to see how that develops, especially with some young guys in that room. One thing that stuck out to me in all of that was, if he doesn't know what is going on, he's really good about asking questions. And that's massive. And Kirby Smart went on to say that, sometimes just asking questions in those scenarios is just as important as just knowing what to do and doing things like the right way, like making sure you're asking those questions. And think about it. I'm sure it's intimidating to ask certain questions too, when you're dealing with, Coach Boom and Kirby Smart, like both of those guys. That'd be intimidating to be a defensive backs coach right there.
You're talking about two of the best in the business that you're having to meet expectations for.
So it's probably a little, you get nervous just going up to even ask them questions because you think that like you got to prove yourself to them and stuff, and then you don't know something. But Kirby Smart reinforced to him, hey, there's no shame in needing to ask a question. I want you to ask questions when you don't know what you should be doing in these moments or something like that, because I want to build you to be that same thing. Every single day, I want to make you a better coach than you were yesterday. And I think that, that was that's a big thing I took away from that comment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think also him talking about, I really think he's a rising star in this industry. What he is doing is something that's really going to shoot up quickly. He's going to be a name that catches fire at UGA, and he's already doing really good things, but people are going to start noticing that now. Because when you're at Rutgers University coaching football, not many people are paying attention to you. There's not a whole lot of people covering the Rutgers. and not a whole lot of like juicy info is going to be coming out of Rutgers football. Part of the reason because they're really bad and just not a whole lot going on over there. So now that he's at UGA, you got a lot of attention around you. You got two of the best in the industry kind of grooming you. Like you already have the really good skills to be a successful coach. Now we're going to teach you how to become a successful coach and really guide you along this path that you're already walking on.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of signifies also the type of guys that Kirby Smart is looking at when he's making hires. Sometimes you're going to get a Stacy Searles, who's a stapled guy in college football. He's been around for a long time, kind of like how Matt Luke was. He's a guy that has been around college football for a long time. So sometimes you're going to get those people. You're going to get a Todd Monken, who's been around football for a long time. But then also you're going to get a Fran Brown. You're going to get a Dan Lanning. You're going to get a Glenn Schumann as well. And so far, all of those hires have panned out for him really well. And so now Fran Brown is the next step in that trajectory.
Yeah, that's one thing I don't doubt Kirby Smart can do is take one of these younger coaches and make a name for them or help them make a name for themselves.
And he's been in those shoes. That's why I think he really is so good at it.
Well, and he learned from one of the best to ever do it as well. Too. Like he was in those shoes coaching for Alabama or under Nick Saban for so many years that he learned and absorbed all of that from it. I think that's a huge testament to like why he's such a good coach is because not only did he work under Nick Saban for so long, he really retained what he learned from Nick Saban because you can see a lot of Nick Saban's identity mixed through what Kirby Smart has been able to accomplish at Georgia. And it's kind of funny, with that being said, some of the comments that we've been hearing from Kirby Smart yesterday, almost is the random things you've been hearing from Nick Saban lately, where he started to be a little bit more open in press conferences lately than he had been in the past. And maybe that's, we talked about this weeks ago after Georgia's national championship. Kirby Smart interviewed with Chris Fowler, and he was talking about like where the game was going and things that he was concerned about. And he talked about being concerned about the different things in the game. And I think what he took away is maybe he needs to be more vocal in certain areas as far as like concerns of the game, like potential players, being a little bit more high maintenance in certain position groups and trying to convince them to stay. Maybe he needed to say something like that in the public view so it's kind of received by players that, a huge coach in this business and a guy that, is very important in this sport is saying, hey, this is an issue and that's not going to look good anymore. You know what I mean? I think he took that step from it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So like we said, Kirby Smart dropped a lot of info in his press conference. And if you didn't retain much of the information that we said or like the quotes he said, we have the article over there on Dogs Daily that you guys can check out. It's really word for word on every single one of these topics, whether it be Stetson, depth chart, Fran Brown, new coaches, anything and everything. It's word for word. So you can go over there and read it. And you can probably retain more information through that than you did through us. But hopefully you did listen to us as well, because I think we put in a lot of good insight on those topics as well. And we kind of expounded upon what Kirby Smart was saying and maybe put a little bit of context towards it as well. So, a lot of good things said and a different side of Kirby Smart for sure. I think we can both agree on
the
that.
Positive side, though. I enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely.
Personally, especially being in media members like what we're doing here, it gives us a little bit more to talk about, and I appreciate it. When it's the middle of March and there's not as much going on, there's some spring practice and stuff like that, but it's kind of nice to see some things like that from your head coach to kind of give you some stuff to talk about personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just also been so much going around the Georgia program. Another thing that we could talk about is recruiting last week in the recruiting visit is that there was a loaded list of recruits that came to UGA on campus last weekend. Saturday was also the first day of padded practice for UGA as well. And there was guys on campus who were able to see that. And there's names like Arch Manning, who we have talked about many of times on this show as well. And I think it kind of signifies of Kirby Smart riding the momentum wave right now, because you just won a national championship. Like you had that huge accomplishment for not only you, for the University of Georgia and all those players. And then you turn around and you go to the NFL Combine and you get all this exposure. You get all this buzz around your players about how good you are at developing your players, getting them NFL ready. So when is there a better time than now to bring in a bunch of high school kids that you're trying to get to come here and bring them on campus, put their eyes on the product that you're putting on the table for them, and sell them your product as well? I mean, you got so many other people talking about you, so why not bring them on there and you can sell it yourself and show them and get them around players, get them around campus, be like, yeah, this is the place to be right now in college football.
Absolutely. And some of the, between this class, going back to a comment we made earlier about having some holes in different spots of the rosters at, not necessarily the holes, but just lack of depth at certain positions. Defensive back is a position group that, is extremely important in this recruiting class and other times to really help build that depth up. And so seeing big names come through, Athens, at all position groups in general, it's been really nice to see. Like you said, it's just that momentum thing where maybe you're going to start seeing names pop off that list as far as commits starting to pop up and everything like that. One thing I did want to kind of go back on a conversation we were having earlier about those position groups being a little bit thinner was, a lot of talk comes up of, are they going to then go to the transfer portal, to maybe try to add some veteran experience, some depth. Like last year, there was a hole at defensive back, right? Like there was a huge gap there, and he was able to fill it by using that, method, right? The transfer portal, it's the day and age of college football at this point. That's what they do, and that's how they're going to be able to make that happen. And one thing that is interesting about that is it's going to be tough for Georgia to do that this year because they have a kind of stacked roster as far as scholarships go. If you do the math, and we talked about this last week, I believe, they're probably 5 or 6 above.
I think it's 6 right now.
I think they're, roughly, if you do the math on it, they're around 91 scholarships. They need to be at 85. I think that's what we talked about. That's the numbers we put out last week. And which means they have 6 more than they can actually have on roster right now. And so if they want to bring somebody else in,
make even more
they've got to make more room than those 6 guys. So what I'm, saying that for is, after spring practice or even mid-spring practice to the, after G-Day, when you start seeing names leave the program, it's don't panic because one, they have to clear some space. They have to get rid of 6 scholarships. So there are at least 6 guys that are going to leave this program. Like otherwise, what are they going to do? Like they can't do that, or they're going to have to pull a scholarship from somebody else because they cannot have more than 85 scholarship athletes. So then if they're going to go out and get another defensive back, that means they've got to take 7 off. So you're going to see names leave, and it's going to be interesting to see if maybe there's going to be some guys that are encouraged to transfer because they're going to have to, and it's going to be an interesting thing to see. That's college football now.
Yeah, I was about to say is that goes right back to what Kirby said of that's the day and age of college football right now, and it's made managing a roster a lot more difficult because when you factor in now you can load up recruiting classes. It's why Texas A&M took 28 kids this last year, the biggest class ever and the most talented because again, you took 28 kids, the most in college football history for a recruiting class. So when you factor that in, now you can take a lot more kids as well. That also means you're taking up a lot more roster spots, a lot more scholarships, and you got to dwindle down your roster and find ways to make room for those players. And if you want to go into the portal, if you want to dip into the portal, you want to go get talent out there as well, you got to make even more room. So there's just so much going on. Like we've said, that NIL has played a big part in the chaos of college football. So is roster management, and you got to pay a lot of attention to it now, and you got to be careful when you're dealing with these things as well, because when you got to make room, that also means you're telling someone, hey, we think it's best if you move on from us. We kind of part our ways, and you go put your talent elsewhere. It's not that we don't believe in you as a player, but if you're 3 years in and you're not cutting it at practice, and you've kind of hit your ceiling, and there's guys kind of leaping over you now, it's going to be those type of conversations.
On the wall kind of thing. And it's going to be that kind of conversation. I believe that Kirby Smart and the staff is able to take that delicately enough to where they're saying, hey, it's going to be in your best interest because unfortunately, if you were to stay here, I don't know that you're going to be able to make it on the field. You can go to another school where you will be able to get on the field. I believe that there's a school out there that you will be able to walk on there and play, day one kind of thing, or at least put yourself in the argument to actually do that.
We'll absolutely help you find that school. We'll find a perfect fit for you as well. It'll be things like that. So it'll suck. It absolutely will for those conversations to be had and to see some of those players go. But also just keep in mind that it's a new opportunity for them, and hopefully they get to put their product on the field and show people what they possess and how talented of a football player they are. And so hopefully it just ends up being like a great opportunity for both sides, and it just kind of ends mutually. But then again, it's tough, and but again, it's a business. You hear Kirby Smart use that word a lot when talking about his football team, and that's exactly how you have to treat it sometimes.
Right. Well, it's a business on both sides of it. Like that's why you're going to see other kids that maybe, that you don't want to leave are, going to potentially go because they feel like they need to get in a seat where they can start doing something now rather than potentially fighting for another spot and still waiting a little bit longer for it, which is where you end up sometimes at position groups where you're a little bit thinner than you expected because some players might do that. it's a business on both sides, so it has to be respected both ways, I think, at the same time. Like, the kids got to put themselves in a position that's best for them. The team has to be put in a position that's best for the university, and Kirby Smart at the same time. But there's a respectful way to go about it, and I do have confidence that Kirby Smart can handle that appropriately, and his staff as a whole.
Yeah. And being able to do those type of things, being able to manage a roster, being able to have enough talent on your roster to where those decisions do have to be made, there is some positive things about that to where you are just loaded with talent, but also means that is a positive thing to come out of that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why Kirby Smart has become one of the kings of college football. And you know what else talks about kings? King of the Hill. And that's what we're going to get into right now. We got another fun segment of King of the Hill, a take that we are willing to die on a hill defending yet again today. And this time we are rolling with, do championships define greatness? So I think there's quite a few different avenues you could go down. I think I think this conversation really centers around your personal opinion on how you look at a person's greatness. Some people look at stats. Some people look at championships. Some people look at track record. A lot of things that play into this. But does a championship define a player's career, or even like an organization or things like that? Like, does championships define greatness, Jeremiah?
Personally, I'm going to say no, and I've got a list of names. I'm going to read why it's a no for me, because if you were to say that, then these players that I'm about to say, you can't consider them great players because they've never won a championship, right? So you've got Dan Marino, Dick Butkus, Barry Sanders, Randy Moss, Allen Iverson. We're going to go cross sports here. Ken Griffey Jr. I already put Dan Marino on there. That's the list that I had right there. Like, those names, they never won a championship in their sport between baseball, football, and all of it. Like, they never won. So you would tell me that all of those players wouldn't be considered great players in their time because they didn't play on a team that was capable of winning a championship? To me, that's just...
And that's my whole thing, is that I see championships as a team statistic. I don't see that as a singular player.
One player can't win you the championship every
year. You hear
year.
All the time when you hear the infamous MJ versus LeBron debate. Everybody talks about, well, MJ's got 6 rings and LeBron doesn't. And then talking about Matt Ryan, if he's a Hall of Famer. Well, Matt Ryan doesn't.
That's kind of what sparked this topic for me today.
Matt Ryan does not have a Super Bowl ring, so he is not deserving of a Hall of Fame, some people say. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so some people do define greatness in regards to championships. But again, like, it took Georgia's entire team to win a national championship last year. There wasn't a singular player or a single factor that played in, that really was the main reason why Georgia won a national championship. It took a great defense. It took a quarterback to come in mid-season and control your offense and manage it really, really well. It took guys like A.D. Mitchell and Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey to step up and fill in some major holes in an offense that were desperately needed when guys were going down with injuries. It took the offensive line kind of figuring things out on the fly when Tate Ratledge went down in the first game of the season and filling those seasons. So, like, so many things play into a championship. You got to have some things that go your way as well. Like, you got to have some breaks on your end as well with other people in the sport. So there's so many things that play into a championship that I don't think when you're talking about a player that you can define their greatness and their legacy off of how many championships they have.
No, you really can't. And I'm glad you brought up, Matt Ryan on this stuff too, because that's kind of like, one, I was scrolling through things and trying to find a topic for us today as well. He's one of the people that got in my mind because I was listening to, I was watching ESPN yesterday. I don't even remember which show it was because I was watching a few of them. And Mel Kiper came on there and they were talking after, Matt Ryan being traded. Now he's been in the limelight for a little while, which it did. But I understand the moving on and stuff like that at the same time. But I did feel really bad for him, the way that everything went down between all of the speculation of Watson and everything like that. I don't think that he ever got the respect he deserved in Atlanta. That's a whole other discussion that we've had before on the show of whether or not he should be a Hall of Famer or not based on what he's been able to do. But Mel came on there and he said that he hadn't done enough because he hadn't got that chance. He said he felt like he did need that championship. And I can't remember who was talking to him. It was one of the shows. I was flipping between different shows. It might have been Stephen A. Actually, it was Stephen A. Smith, which I don't know why I was watching First Take. I can't stand that show, but I think it came on after something else and it just stayed on in the background while I was working. But he was talking about, like, how can you say that he would be a Hall of Famer at this point because he had 4 seasons, 4 or 5 losing seasons in his career or something of that nature. And I'm like, man, first of all, Atlanta's got a ridiculous number of issues with Matt Ryan wasn't the problem over that. Since 2011 to this season, he had 4,000 yards passing every single year. Except last year, he was off by 32 yards, I think was the number of it. He's got 4 Pro Bowls, an All-Pro selection, and an MVP award. I mean, and he's once Tom Brady had retired for 2 days, he was the one that had the most career, like active leader in passing yards. So I don't understand how somebody can sit here and say that just because he didn't get the ring, that wasn't his fault of why they did not get a ring. He should have one. That's the other argument. Like, he should have one at this point in Atlanta. So, like, that was already happened. Somebody else was talking about this because this is a conversation that's also been brought up a lot with him being, a Colt now as well, was that loss was not on him. And some very good points were put out. Like, had they kicked a field goal, late in that game where he ended up getting sacked and taken back, but he had made a amazing pass followed by an amazing catch from Julio Jones.
Should have gone down as almost the best play.
It should have been like the game-sealing play,
yeah.
Right? They were in field goal range. Then he gets sacked because Freeman missed a block, by the way, on that. Like, the running back missed a block. A lot of things went wrong. But one thing that people forget is after that play, it put him in a 3rd and long situation. He then proceeds to make another great play, about 10, 15-yard play, that put them back in field goal range, but got negated from a hold. So he did his part. So to say that he doesn't have a ring means he's not a great NFL quarterback is absolutely ridiculous. And that's where I get into this argument is how can you sit here and say just because a player doesn't have a championship, all of those names that I just listed, you don't think they're great players because they didn't win a championship? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also I always talk about how, well, if you're going to go off championships like people often do talking about MJ as the GOAT, then why isn't Bill Russell the GOAT of basketball? Because he has the most NBA championships amongst any NBA player ever. So why isn't he the GOAT? Like, that's where I get into the disagreement of using championships as a factor of a player's greatness and legacy, because it can't be this thing where, like, sometimes it helps your argument and sometimes you don't, and you only use it when it helps you. There's so many, like, I think a person's track record, the stats they put up, the fact that Matt Ryan has put up the stats that he has, even though he's had however many losing seasons and has had to deal with so much crap with the Falcons as a team and the organization that they built around him, the fact that he is still considered such a great player, even though he's been with a horrendous organization over the last 14 years.
And you pulled this stat yourself, and correct me if I'm wrong, he never had a top 15 defense his entire time in Atlanta.
Best was 16. That was it. And I mean, I think there's so many more valuable things to talk about in regards to a player's legacy and the impact that they had on a game and their overall greatness in the sport than just how many rings did you win? I think that does play a valuable part, of course, but I don't think it has to be the main focus around, because again, there's a lot of things that play into winning a championship, and one player, while it also helps you, having a great player certainly helps you get to that point, it also takes a lot of other things to go your way and a lot of other valuable pieces on your team as well. Like, someone asked Kirby Smart about A.D. Mitchell and how him making that, or Keely Ringo, excuse me. They asked about Keely Ringo having that game-sealing interception pick 6 in the national championship, and if that's kind of like the top of his career and how that really gets things going for him. And Kirby Smart went on and said, like, yeah, I mean, he made a great play, but I would also argue that wasn't the thing, that wasn't the play that won the game. There's so many other things that play into winning a game and that won us that championship, like AD catching the touchdown in the end zone the drive before that, or whoever, like, making a tackle.
Yeah, there was a lot of plays that led up to it.
So yeah, just like that, just how there's not one play really that wins you a championship. There's not just one player or any, and like, I just think that championships don't define a person's career.
No, and I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. And another thing of the same kind of conversation is one play doesn't lose you a championship or a game necessarily. Like, it may be the last play, but if you're in a position for one singular play to lose you or win you the game, there was a lot more that either went right or went wrong during that game that led to it as well.
There's something that put you in that position to begin with.
That might be the most memorable play because it might be the end of the game. But like you said, with that pick 6, it sealed the game.
Yes.
It didn't win the game. Georgia had already taken the lead, and they were playing well defensively. That had already gotten it down to a 3rd down. Had that ball just been knocked down, they would have been in a 4th down situation. Georgia they wouldn't have punted. They couldn't punt. They had to go down and score. So they would have been forced to go for it on 4th down, and they may not have made it with the way Georgia's defense was playing at that moment in time. the interception itself is one play in a huge game. So you can't look at one play from one player or just one player in general. Like you said earlier with Georgia, you can say the defense as a whole, maybe you can credit them with it because of how well they played, especially early in that game where they really held on in that game. But you can go player by player and say this person contributed, this person contributed. Yeah. You can go to the offensive side and say the same thing on that side of the ball. So it's a team sport. And I think the other unfair side of it, when you start getting into this conversation as championships defining greatness, quarterbacks are almost the only ones that actually get subjected to that.
Yeah.
In any other sport, you really don't hear it as much either. Outside of basketball, you hear it a little bit. But like you said, like if you're really going to go like that, then Bill Russell's the one that's, but that's not really the fair way to do it in that sport either. But in football specifically, I feel like it's always targeted at quarterbacks on there. And how is that a fair stat to put on a quarterback? I don't think quarterbacks necessarily should take win-losses. I don't think that's something people should credit them with a win or a loss.
I hate that
because it's a team sport. They made like in the Super Bowl that the Falcons played in, I believe Matt Ryan threw for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He wasn't the problem in that game. So why would he have his ring taken away from him in your eyes and saying he's not a great player because he didn't get the ring? What did he do wrong? It was a team sport, and the team and coaching led to that. So I don't understand how they're going to put all that on quarterbacks all the time and say quarterbacks have to have this when the guy has an MVP. He's been an All-Pro, and he's got 4 Pro Bowl selections.
Else. He checks every single box.
And then he has the statistics to go with it, too.
He just doesn't have the Super Bowl ring. And it's that one checkbox for some reason that holds him back in some people's eyes of being considered one of the greatest to ever do it. Certainly the best Falcon to ever do that.
He is, by far, this is one that I'll say you can argue with your mama on. He's the best Falcons player in history at this point in my head.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to listen to I'll listen to your debate on something else, but you're not going to win that argument with me at this point.
He definitely provided Falcons fans with a lot of great memories to hold on to. He was a great role model. He was just a great person to represent your organization, always handled things professionally, never complained, never expounded upon issues that he may have had with his team. And even now still, he's acted very professionally, even if he was done wrong by the Falcons. He's done a lot of great things, and he continues to speak highly of them, and that's just the person that he is. And so, yeah, I think we both agree, obviously, that championships...
Shocker.
Yeah, shocker. Championships do not or should not define a person's legacy or career, certainly. So
I think they do unfairly in certain areas because, once again, it's certain people are judged by it, but others aren't. And, it doesn't... Yeah. It's a stupid argument to make.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So I think we have beaten that argument to rest. We've said everything. We've... put all of our facts onto the table and presented you guys with our best argument. At least we feel like we presented you guys with our best argument for that topic. So yet another King of the Hill segment put to rest. We're going to have more. We asked Twitter for some recommendations for today's topic as well. We saw a lot of good ones that we probably wanted to choose, but we felt that this one was the best one with the recency, like we said, with Matt Ryan and the situations. But there's a lot of good ones that you guys put out there, and we're certainly going to get to them. What you guys helped us out with, so we got a list going now of topics that we're definitely going to be putting out in the future, and we're going to be discussing because the takes and the opinions are going to stay hot on this segment just as they have, and someone is going to come away victorious if there ever is a disagreement. But that is
we'll find another one out. We had one last week. We'll find another one. We did. I promise.
Things got a little heated last week. I was happy to see that.
It was fun.
That's going to do it for today's show and King of the Hill. Always support us on our social media. You guys know the drill by now. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Like the video if you haven't. Go follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, follow our pages. You can always find the live streams on Twitter and Facebook as well. YouTube is probably preferred because that's the place where you can always see the comments. It's the most consistent with us.
YouTube and Facebook, we can see the comments on there. If you're on Twitter and you're commenting, it doesn't pop up for some reason. I can't help you there.
We hate that. We just don't. We haven't figured out a way to see that. But we're glad that you guys are here regardless. But anyways, help us out in those situations. Help us out on social media. Help us continue to grow. And Jeremiah, give us our closing statement.
As always, keep it classy in the Classic City. We will catch you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Dogs Daily on Sports Illustrated. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Dogs Daily crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at Jeremiah_Stod7, to Kyle at DK Fubderberg, and Jonathan at 22_J-Man. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime, go Dogs.